Thank you, Lindsay. Domestic violence has been a part of the fabric of many societies and cultures worldwide. It is so commonplace, in fact, that it has often gone unnoticed and failed to receive the level of concern that it deserves in light of the devastating effects that it can have on families and children. When there have been societal responses to domestic violence, they have been largely centered on crisis intervention. And while crisis intervention is a necessary response to domestic violence and can be highly effective at particular points in time, it alone cannot address the complex dynamics of domestic violence. There is also a strong need for proactive strategies of prevention. Many have heard a lot about domestic violence ending with hospital visits, bruises, scrapes, and the police. What we often don't hear of is how it got there. Most are not educated in the process in which physical violence is bled from a simple difference of opinion. So how do we transform something we can barely identify? Let's start by understanding the basics of domestic violence. Domestic violence and abuse is all about a need for power and using violence as a control method to seek power. The violence is just the tool, not the goal. The goal is to control and manipulate. Violence in the relationship is not just about bruises, although most don't realize they're in a violent relationship until it gets there. Often, abuse starts out minor and builds over time, as in the example of the hand in hot water. For instance, you place your hand in a pot of cool water and slowly, 1 degree at a time, gradually raise the temperature. You barely notice how truly hot the water is getting. The relationships that end up violent begin anything but, usually. So what do abusive relationships look like? Well, it's not always about being slapped around. Abusive relationships come in all forms, all shapes and sizes. It can happen to all kinds of people, regardless of their financial standing, culture, gender, race, or religion. Histories, psychological learning, and personality lie in the deepest depths of violence within a person. Who is the abuser? What have they been through? Who is the victim? Have they been exposed to violence throughout their lives? How scared are they? Some people may be more or less vulnerable to particular kinds of abuse and may experience difficulty in accessing legal remedies or obtaining protection from the abuse because of their ethnicity or economic status. Culture may also affect how and where one seeks assistance, as well as how they experience and respond to that assistance. Also, our childhoods play a large role in how we seek out and view conflict within relationships. Think about where the silverware drawer was in the house that you grew up. And now think about where it is in your house. I suspect that 90% of you will find that it's in the same place, allowing for architectural differences. It's a memory map, so why fix it if it's not broken? But what if you don't or can't recognize that it's broken? That's where we get ourselves into trouble and how we come to repeat social and relational patterns. Abusive relationships are tricky, and just as a fish doesn't know he's wet, we often don't see the subtle markers for abuse in relationship because we are in it. Furthermore, relationship fills our needs, and when our needs are being met, we don't necessarily have an imperative to take a look at how they are being met. A large step in recognizing how our needs are being met is to take a look and understand the basics of conflict in relationships. We need to understand that conflict at the interpersonal level before we can identify ways to transform it. Conflict simply arises from differences. It occurs when people disagree over values, motivations, perceptions, ideas, and/or desires. Sometimes these differences at a glance can look trivial, but when a conflict triggers strong feelings, a deep personal need is at the core of the problem. Differing needs for feeling comfortable and safe create some of the most severe challenges in our personal and professional relationships. It is important to acknowledge that both parties' needs play an important role in the long-term success of most relationships, and each deserves respect and consideration. In personal relationships, a lack of understanding about differing needs can result in distance, arguments, and breakups. In workplace conflicts, differing needs are often at the heart of bitter disputes. When you can recognize the legitimacy of needs and become willing to examine them in an environment of compassionate understanding, it opens pathways to creative problem solving, team building, and improved relationships. It is important to recognize that conflict is not the end of the world. Disagreeing with your partner doesn't mean that your relationship is doomed with no hope. In fact, an average dose of healthy conflict can improve the level of respect in our personal and professional relationships. Conflicts are normal. Addressing conflict in our intimate relationships with ourselves and people around us in a positive manner is important for the foundation blocks of respect, self-awareness, and ultimately happiness in our relationships. Fostering healthy conflict is possible for anyone, despite a vast history of violence in one's life and conditioning received in early learning and development. The vicious cycle ultimately ends with self-transformation and self-awareness. Those that are more aware of themselves as a person are at decreased risk for violent relationship tendencies. In a healthy relationship, there is no need to pretend that problems don't exist or to tiptoe around unmentionable areas. If the partner is weak in some area, he or she accepts it and the other helps accommodate or strengthen it without the use of physical, sexual, emotional, or verbal abuse. I think Fatty had introduced to us the little book of Transformation by John Litterock. He really illustrates for us one basic way to promote and maintain interpersonal relationships, and I really love this quote. He states that try never to ignore or walk away from someone's perception. Instead, try to understand where it's rooted. These things do exist. They are not fun to talk about, and they are very real. The topic of domestic violence comes with heart-wrenching stories of struggle, survival, and sometimes death. Young children are swaying in the balance, absorbing and learning their environment. Let's not encourage them to be the abusers and victims of tomorrow. Let us model for them peace-building strategies, nonviolent coping mechanisms, understanding, compassion for others, and open-minded problem-solving. The more we talk about domestic violence, and the more we create an environment in which victims of domestic violence feel comfortable to come forward and say what is happening to them, the more chance we have of coming to grips with this scourge on our society. The pervasive problem of violence takes everyone to stop it. When addressing domestic violence, many of us often look for a solution rather than a transformation, an end to the conflict rather than a positive and constructive change. Transforming a conflict that may be potentially violent allows us to go beyond the resolution of domestic violence. Regardless of where a person is in their relationship on the spectrum of violence, identifying it and transforming it within is the key to overcoming these issues. Be aware of how you feel. Don't compromise your passionate opinions just because of the narrow-mindedness of today's society. Be proactive in promoting healthy relationships in your own life and validating and accepting others' opinions while maintaining your own. Think before acting or speaking out of anger. These small steps are the cornerstones of transforming conflict in the world, beginning with relationships you have in your own home. Just a few small actions build the starting point for a peaceful future. Many view violence as a normal part of an intimate relationship. We're here to tell you today that it's not, and the change begins with you. Let's begin conflict transformation, self-awareness, and peace with one individual. In the words of a classmate, it really just takes one person to get that concept. Every person in here can be the candle that spreads the light to the next person. My goal is to be a voice in changing the belief systems and practices that support violence and abuse and to promote safe, respectful, and equitable relationships. It's important to refuse to sweep this under the rug because it is an uncomfortable subject, but to breed awareness so that victims' access to support systems are appropriate and lives are saved. Each day, women, men, and children are living in war zones right here in our own country, and very little is being done to protect them. I hope that I can make living that life and escaping that life a little bit easier.